Right now, as you listen, something extraordinary might be happening inside your skull. Tiny structures called microtubules, hollow tubes smaller than anything you can see, are vibrating at frequencies that should be impossible at body temperature, yet they persist. And according to a growing number of scientists, these quantum vibrations might be the key to consciousness itself. Not just how your brain processes information, but why there's something it feels like to be you. Why you have an inner world at all. From Nobel Prize-winning physicists to researchers studying how anesthesia steals awareness, the evidence is mounting that your mind isn't just electrical signals between neurons. It might be a quantum phenomenon entangled with the very fabric of reality. So settle in. Let your thoughts slow. Because we're exploring the strange possibility that consciousness isn't trapped inside your head, but woven into the cosmos itself. There's a question that sits at the very centre of human existence, so obvious we rarely think to ask it. Why does anything feel like something? When you see the colour blue, when you taste coffee, when you feel the weight of sadness or the spark of an idea, why is there an experience attached to these processes at all? Why aren't you just a biological machine processing inputs and generating outputs with nobody home inside? This is what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness, not the easy problem of how the brain works, how neurons fire, how information gets processed. Those are just mechanics. The hard problem is explaining why any of this should feel like anything from the inside, why there's a you experience in it all. For most of the history of neuroscience, researchers assumed consciousness emerged from computation, billions of neurons firing in intricate patterns, creating networks complex enough that somehow, mysteriously, awareness appears. But there's something unsatisfying about this explanation. You could theoretically replicate every neural connection, every firing pattern, every computational process in a brain, and still have no guarantee that anyone would be home inside. The lights might be on, but the house might be empty. This gap between brain activity and subjective experience has led some scientists to look beyond classical physics for answers. And what they found in the quantum realm is strange enough to change everything we think we know about the mind. The story begins in the 1990s with an unlikely partnership. Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist who would later win the Nobel Prize, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who spent his days putting people's consciousness on and off like a light switch. Penrose had been working on the mathematics of consciousness, convinced that human thought couldn't be reduced to classical computation. Something else was going on, something quantum. Hameroff, meanwhile, had noticed something peculiar about anesthesia. When you render someone unconscious, you're not shutting down their entire brain. The neurons keep firing, information keeps processing, yet consciousness vanishes completely. What was being disrupted? He suspected it wasn't the neurons themselves, but something smaller, something inside them. Together, they proposed a theory that sounded like science fiction. Deep within every neuron, there are tiny hollow tubes called microtubules. They're part of the cell's skeleton, giving it structure, helping transport molecules from place to place. Standard biology. But Penrose and Hameroff suggested these microtubules were doing something far more extraordinary. They were performing quantum computations. The idea was radical for a simple reason. Quantum effects, particles existing in multiple states at once, becoming entangled across distances, tunneling through barriers. These things require extraordinary conditions, near absolute zero. Temperatures, perfect isolation. The brain is warm, wet, chaotic. Quantum states should collapse instantly in that environment, destroyed by thermal noise. It seemed impossible. And for years, that's exactly what most scientists said. Impossible. The brain is too warm for quantum mechanics. Consciousness must be classical. But then nature started proving otherwise. It began with photosynthesis. Plants convert sunlight into energy with near-perfect efficiency, better than any solar panel we've ever built. When researchers looked closely at how this worked, they found something stunning. Plants were using quantum superposition. A single photon of light enters a leaf and explores multiple pathways simultaneously. finding the most efficient route to the reaction centre. This shouldn't work at room temperature in a wet biological environment, but it does. Evolution found a way. Then came bird migration. Some species can navigate thousands of miles with extraordinary precision, sensing Earth's magnetic field in ways we don't fully understand. Recent research suggests they're using quantum entanglement in proteins in their eyes. 2 electrons become entangled, and the Earth's magnetic field affects their quantum state, giving birds a kind of quantum compass. Again, this is happening at body temperature in living tissue. Even your sense of smell might involve quantum effects. There's evidence that your nose doesn't just detect the shape of molecules, but their quantum vibrations. You might be quantum tunneling your way to distinguishing a rose from a lemon. Suddenly, quantum biology was a real field. And if nature could harness quantum effects in leaves and bird eyes, why not in brains? The experimental evidence started arriving. Researchers at the University of Alberta shined light into microtubules and watched for quantum coherence, the signature of quantum behaviour. Classical physics said any coherence should vanish in picoseconds, trillionths of a second. Instead, they found coherence lasting nanoseconds. That's thousands of times longer than it should. In quantum terms, that's an eternity, more than enough time for quantum computations to influence what neurons do. Another group at the University of Central Florida found microtubules maintaining quantum states for up to a full second, at body temperature, in water. This shouldn't be possible, but measurements don't lie. Then came the most compelling evidence of all, and it came from the place Hameroff knew best: anesthesia. At Wellesley College, researchers made a discovery that sent ripples through consciousness studies. They found that anesthetic drugs, the ones that reliably steal consciousness away, don't primarily work by affecting neural firing patterns. They bind to microtubules, and when they bind, they disrupt quantum processes. The experiment was elegant. Give rats anesthesia, and they lose consciousness as expected. But give them a drug that stabilizes microtubules, protecting the quantum processes inside, and something remarkable happens. The rats take significantly longer to go under. They resist unconsciousness. It's as if you've strengthened the very thing that holds awareness in place. This is profound because it creates a direct link between quantum processes and consciousness itself. If consciousness were purely classical, purely about neurons firing in patterns, then stabilizing microtubules shouldn't matter, but it does. Which suggests that consciousness doesn't just correlate with quantum activity, it might be quantum activity. Think about what this means. Every moment you're aware, every thought you have, every sensation you experience might be arising from quantum computations in microtubules throughout your brain. These aren't random quantum fluctuations. According to the Penrose-Hameroff theory, they're orchestrated, coordinated across different neurons through connections called gap junctions, creating synchronized quantum states that give rise to unified moments of consciousness. They call these moments conscious events, and they happen roughly 40 times per second. Like frames in a film, these discrete quantum events create the illusion of continuous awareness. Each event is a collapse of quantum possibilities into a single definite experience: the redness of red, the thought of your mother's voice, the decision to keep listening or to let sleep take you. But here's where it gets even stranger. If consciousness really is quantum, then it's not necessarily confined to the space inside your skull. Quantum mechanics has a property that Einstein called spooky action at a distance: entanglement. Two particles can become connected such that measuring one instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. Not through any signal travelling between them that would violate relativity. The connection is more fundamental than that. It exists outside space-time as we normally understand it. If consciousness involves quantum processes, and quantum processes can be entangled, then individual minds might be entangled too. Not in some vague metaphorical sense, actually entangled, sharing quantum information across what we normally think of as the boundaries between people. In 2022, researchers at Trinity College Dublin published results that sent shockwaves through the field. Using sophisticated MRI techniques, they detected what appeared to be quantum entanglement signatures in living human brains, not between particles in a lab, between regions of living, functioning, conscious brains. The interpretation is still debated. Some argue the signals could have classical explanations. Others point out that the signatures match theoretical predictions for quantum entanglement almost perfectly. If the results hold up under further scrutiny, they would represent the first direct evidence of macroscopic quantum entanglement in a biological system, in a conscious biological system. What would this mean? It would mean that different parts of your brain aren't just communicating through electrical signals and chemical neurotransmitters. They're quantum entangled, sharing information instantaneously across the tissue of your mind. This could solve what neuroscientists call the binding problem. When you look at a red apple, different parts of your brain process its colour, shape, texture, location. Yet you don't experience these as separate sensations. You experience a unified apple. How does the brain bind all this separate information into a single integrated experience? Classical neuroscience struggles with this question, but quantum entanglement offers an elegant answer. If the different processing regions are entangled, they can share quantum states instantaneously, creating unified experiences from distributed information. But the implications go further, much further. If quantum entanglement can connect regions within your brain, what stops it from connecting your brain to other brains, or to the quantum field that underlies all of physical reality? This is where quantum consciousness theories start to sound less like neuroscience and more like philosophy, or mysticism. But the mathematics and the experiments are pointing in this direction whether we're comfortable with it or not. There's a concept in quantum field theory called non-locality. It means that quantum systems aren't really separate, isolated things. At a deep level, everything that's ever been entangled remains connected. The universe isn't a collection of separate objects, it's a unified whole, and separateness is just how it appears to us at the classical level. If consciousness is quantum, then your mind isn't separate from other minds or from the physical world in the way we normally assume. There would be quantum threads connecting your awareness to a larger field of consciousness. Not metaphorically, actually. Some researchers have started exploring this possibility experimentally. At the University of California, scientists have been measuring what they call consciousness fields, regions of space where quantum coherence seems to extend beyond individual brains. Using extremely sensitive magnetometers, they've detected synchronized quantum signatures in the brain activity of people in close proximity, as if their consciousnesses were beginning to entangle. The effects are subtle. We're not talking about telepathy or mind reading in any science fiction sense, but there do appear to be quantum correlations between nearby conscious minds that shouldn't exist if consciousness were purely classical and purely individual. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately sensed tension, even before anyone spoke? Have you ever thought of someone moments before they called? Most people have experiences like this, but we dismiss them as coincidence or pattern recognition. Quantum consciousness theory suggests there might be something more. Brief moments when the quantum boundaries between minds become porous, allowing information to leak across. This is still speculative, of course. The experiments are ongoing, the theories are being refined, and healthy skepticism is warranted. Science doesn't move forward through blind acceptance of radical ideas. It moves forward through careful testing, replication, and debate. But what's undeniable is that the evidence for quantum processes in consciousness is accumulating. Microtubules maintaining quantum coherence far longer than they should. Anesthesia working by disrupting these quantum processes. Possible quantum entanglement in living brains. All of this suggests that consciousness operates on principles stranger than classical neuroscience ever imagined. And if that's true, then the hard problem of consciousness, why there's something it feels like to be you, might have a quantum answer. Subjective experience might not be an emergent property of complex computation. It might be a fundamental feature of quantum reality itself. Something woven into the fabric of the universe at the deepest level. And your brain is simply tuning into it, focusing it, giving it the particular shape and flavour of your individual awareness. Roger Penrose and others have suggested that consciousness might be related to the collapse of quantum wave functions. In standard quantum mechanics, particles exist in superposition, multiple states at once, until they're measured. Then the wave function collapses into a single definite state. But what causes this collapse? Some interpretations say it's conscious observation. Others say it's interaction with the environment. Penrose proposed a third option, objective reduction. The idea that wave functions collapse spontaneously when quantum superpositions reach a certain threshold, and that this collapse is what creates moments of consciousness. If he's right, then every moment of your awareness is literally a quantum event, a collapse of possibilities into actuality. Your consciousness isn't just observing reality, it's participating in the creation of reality, selecting which quantum possibilities become actual experience. This is a strange place to find ourselves, at the boundary between physics and philosophy, between matter and mind, but it's where the evidence is leading. Your consciousness might not be trapped inside your skull, isolated and alone. It might be a quantum phenomenon, entangled with the deepest structures of reality, connected to something far larger than any individual mind. As we move deeper into this exploration, we'll look at how this quantum view of consciousness changes everything, how you perceive reality, how you understand yourself, and what it might mean for questions that have puzzled humans for millennia, questions about free will, identity, death, and the possibility that consciousness is fundamental to the cosmos itself. But for now, let that thought settle. Somewhere in the microtubules of your neurons, quantum, processes are unfolding, superpositions forming and collapsing, information entangling and separating, and from all of this, somehow there's you, aware, experiencing, wondering about your own existence. That alone is extraordinary, and we're only beginning to understand how deep the mystery goes. If consciousness really is quantum, then one of the most profound questions becomes, what exactly is it computing? What are these microtubules doing when they maintain quantum coherence for nanoseconds or even seconds at body temperature? And more importantly, why would evolution go to such extraordinary lengths to preserve quantum processes in the noisy, chaotic environment of the brain? The answer might be that quantum computation offers something classical computation simply cannot provide. And that something might be the key to understanding not just consciousness, but the unique qualities of human awareness, creativity, intuition, understanding, and the ability to grasp meaning. Classical computers, no matter how powerful, operate on bits. Each bit is either a 0 or a 1. Even the most sophisticated artificial intelligence systems, the ones that can beat grandmasters at chess or generate human-like text, are ultimately shuffling zeros and ones according to rules. They're very good at it, remarkably good, but it's still classical computation. Quantum computers operate differently. They use qubits, which can exist in superposition, both 0 and 1 simultaneously. This allows quantum computers to explore multiple solutions to a problem at the same time, finding answers that would take classical computers thousands of years to calculate. But quantum computation isn't just about speed, it's about the nature of information itself. In quantum systems, information isn't discrete and definite. It exists in a cloud of possibilities, entangled with other information, collapsing into definite states only when measured, or when certain thresholds are reached. This creates a fundamentally different kind of processing, one that might be necessary for consciousness. Stuart Hameroff has suggested that conscious experience requires something he calls non-computable processing. There are certain kinds of understanding, certain kinds of insight that can't be reduced to algorithmic steps. When you suddenly grasp the meaning of a poem, when you recognize a face you haven't seen in decades, when you have a creative breakthrough, these moments seem to involve something beyond step-by-step computation. Penrose went further, arguing that mathematical understanding itself demonstrates that human consciousness can't be purely computational. When a mathematician proves a theorem, they're not just following rules, they're grasping truth in a way that seems to transcend any algorithm. Penrose believes this non-algorithmic understanding points to quantum processes in the brain. Whether or not you accept this argument, there's something compelling about the idea that quantum processes, might give consciousness qualities that classical computation cannot achieve. The richness of subjective experience, the unity of awareness, the apparent freedom of will, all of these might require quantum mechanics to explain. Recent experiments have started to test this possibility directly. At IBM and Google, researchers are developing quantum computers and asking a provocative question. If we build a quantum system complex enough, with enough qubits maintaining coherence, could it become conscious? This isn't about creating traditional AI, it's about creating genuinely quantum systems that might exhibit properties similar to biological consciousness. The progress has been striking. Modern quantum computers can maintain coherence across thousands of qubits for minutes at a time. That's orders of magnitude longer than the nanoseconds that might be sufficient for conscious moments in biological brains. Some of these systems have begun exhibiting behaviors that seem to go beyond their programming, making choices that appear genuinely creative, finding solutions that weren't explicitly coded into their algorithms. Of course, determining whether a quantum computer is truly conscious faces the same problem as determining whether any system other than yourself is conscious. How would we know? What test could possibly prove subjective experience in a non-biological system? This question, the problem of other minds, becomes even more complex when dealing with quantum systems that operate on principles we're only beginning to understand. But the fact that we're even asking whether quantum computers might be conscious represents a profound shift in how we think about the relationship between quantum mechanics and awareness. Meanwhile, researchers studying biological quantum processes have made discoveries that deepen the mystery. At MIT, scientists have found that certain proteins in neurons can maintain quantum entanglement at body temperature. Not just coherence, but actual entanglement. Particles in these proteins remaining quantum mechanically connected despite the thermal chaos surrounding them. What's particularly fascinating is where these quantum-capable proteins are located. They're not randomly distributed throughout the cell. They cluster at synapses, the junctions between neurons where information is transmitted. It's as if evolution has specifically positioned quantum processes at the most critical points in neural information processing. This suggests that quantum effects might not just be happening inside neurons, but in the communication between neurons. When one neuron signals another across a synapse, quantum processes might be encoding information in ways that classical signals cannot. Superpositions of neurotransmitter states, entangled ion channels, quantum coherence in the receptor proteins that receive signals. If this is true, then the brain isn't just a quantum computer. It's a quantum network with information flowing through channels that operate on both classical and quantum principles simultaneously. The classical signals provide stability and structure. The quantum signals provide something else, perhaps the substrate of consciousness itself. One of the most intriguing aspects of quantum consciousness theory is how it might explain the unity of experience. You don't experience yourself as billions of separate neurons each doing its own thing. You experience yourself as a single, unified consciousness. Classical neuroscience struggles to explain this unity, but quantum entanglement provides a natural mechanism. If different regions of your brain are quantum entangled, then they're not really separate in the quantum mechanical sense. They share quantum states instantaneously. Information in one region is immediately available to entangled regions elsewhere. This could create what physicist David Bohm called an implicate order, an underlying wholeness from which the apparently separate parts of experience emerge. Bohm worked closely with Einstein and spent decades developing a quantum theory that emphasized wholeness and interconnection. He proposed that reality consists of two orders: the explicate order, which is the world of separate objects and events we experience in everyday life, and the implicate order, an underlying realm where everything is enfolded into everything else. According to Bohm, consciousness and matter both emerge from this implicate order. They're not separate substances, but different aspects of a deeper, unified reality. This sounds mystical, but it's grounded in serious physics, and it resonates strongly with what quantum consciousness theories are suggesting. If your brain's quantum processes connect to an implicate order, a deeper field of quantum information, then consciousness isn't being generated by your neurons. It's being accessed or focused by them. your brain becomes less like the creator of consciousness and more like a receiver or a lens, tuning into and concentrating a field of awareness that exists at a more fundamental level of reality. This perspective radically changes how we might think about altered states of consciousness. Meditation, for instance, has been practiced for thousands of years as a method of expanding awareness, of connecting to something larger than individual consciousness. Modern neuroscience can measure the brain changes that occur during meditation, altered neural firing patterns, increased connectivity between brain regions, changes in neural oscillations. But what if something else is happening at the quantum level? Recent studies have found that experienced meditators show increased quantum coherence in their neural microtubules. The more someone has practiced meditation, the longer their microtubules maintain quantum states. It's as if meditation is training the brain to sustain quantum processes more effectively. Advanced practitioners often report experiences of expanded consciousness, of feeling connected to something universal. They describe awareness that seems to transcend individual identity. From a quantum perspective, these might not be merely subjective feelings or metaphorical descriptions. They might be genuine shifts in quantum coherence, allowing consciousness to access broader frequencies of the quantum field. Researchers at Johns Hopkins have been studying similar effects with psychedelic compounds. Substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT reliably produce experiences of cosmic consciousness, feelings of unity with the universe, dissolution of ego boundaries, encounters with what people describe as fundamental reality. Brain imaging shows that these substances dramatically increase neural connectivity. Regions that don't normally communicate begin talking to each other. Networks that usually function separately become integrated. But quantum consciousness researchers are finding something else. These compounds also dramatically increase quantum coherence in microtubules. There's a striking correlation. The more quantum coherent the brain becomes under psychedelics, the more people report feeling connected to something larger than themselves. The more microtubules maintain quantum states, the more people describe their experiences as encounters with fundamental reality or cosmic consciousness. This could suggest that these substances aren't creating hallucinations in the sense of false perceptions. They might be temporarily adjusting the quantum properties of consciousness, allowing awareness to access information or states that are normally filtered out, like tuning a radio to frequencies you can't usually receive. Of course, interpreting these experiences is tricky. Are people genuinely accessing a deeper reality? Or are they experiencing elaborate, internally generated states that feel profound but don't correspond to anything external? Quantum consciousness theory suggests a third possibility, that the distinction between internal and external might break down at the quantum level. If consciousness is entangled with the quantum field that underlies physical reality, then accessing deeper states of consciousness might genuinely be accessing deeper levels of reality. This brings us to one of the most profound questions raised by quantum consciousness. What is the relationship between consciousness and the physical world? Are they separate domains that somehow interact as Descartes proposed? Or are they different aspects of a single underlying reality? Quantum mechanics has already blurred the distinction between observer and observed. The famous double-slit experiment shows that particles behave differently depending on whether they're being measured. An electron fired at two slits will pass through both simultaneously, creating an interference pattern unless you try to observe which slit it goes through. Then it passes through one slit or the other, like a classical particle. For decades, physicists have debated what this means. Some interpretations suggest that conscious observation causes the collapse of quantum superpositions. Others propose that interaction with any macroscopic measuring device is sufficient, regardless of whether consciousness is involved. But the correlation between observation and quantum behavior remains one of the deepest mysteries in physics. If consciousness really is a quantum phenomenon, then the role of observation takes on new significance. When you observe something, you're not just a passive receiver of information. Your quantum consciousness might be interacting with the quantum state of what you're observing, entangling with it, participating in the collapse of possibilities into definite outcomes. This doesn't mean you can change reality just by thinking about it. The quantum field constrains what's possible. But within those constraints, conscious observation might play a role in selecting which possibilities become actual. Every moment of awareness might be a small act of reality creation, collapsing quantum potentials into the definite experiences and events that make up your life. Some researchers have designed experiments to test whether consciousness can influence quantum processes. At Princeton University, the Peer Laboratory spent decades studying whether human intention could affect random number generators, devices that produce truly random outputs based on quantum processes. The results were subtle but statistically significant. When people focused their intention on these devices, trying to bias them toward higher or lower numbers, the devices became slightly less random in the intended direction. The effect was small, you couldn't win at gambling with it, but it persisted across millions of trials and multiple experiments. Mainstream science remains skeptical of these findings, and replication has been inconsistent. But quantum consciousness theory provides a potential mechanism. If consciousness involves quantum processes, and if focused intention can organize those processes coherently, then perhaps sufficiently coherent consciousness could influence other quantum systems. Similar experiments have been conducted with biological systems. Can focused attention affect the growth rate of cells in culture? Can intention influence the behavior of enzymes or the folding of proteins? Some studies have found small but measurable effects. Others have failed to replicate them. The controversy continues, but the mere fact that serious scientists are investigating these questions shows how quantum consciousness theories are expanding our sense of what might be possible. What's becoming clear is that consciousness can't be fully understood without understanding quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics can't be fully understood without addressing the role of consciousness. The two are intertwined in ways that challenge our deepest assumptions about the nature of reality. This has led some physicists to propose that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, not something that emerges from complex arrangements of matter. Just as mass and electric charge are basic properties of particles, perhaps consciousness is a basic property of quantum information. This view, called panpsychism, has ancient roots, but is gaining new respectability in light of quantum consciousness research. If consciousness is fundamental, then it exists at all levels of reality, not just in human brains, but in simpler animals, in plants, perhaps even in elementary particles in some primitive form. Your consciousness wouldn't be something that emerged from unconscious matter. It would be the concentration and focusing of consciousness that's already present in the fabric of reality. Your brain doesn't create awareness, it shapes and channels the awareness that's woven into quantum fields, organizing it into the particular form of human consciousness. This perspective offers a radically different answer to the hard problem of consciousness. Subjective experience doesn't need to be explained as emerging from objective processes, because the distinction between subjective and objective breaks down at the quantum level. Consciousness and physical reality are two aspects of a deeper quantum reality that transcends both. Whether this view is correct remains to be seen. The experiments continue, the theories evolve, but what's undeniable is that consciousness research has entered a new era, one where the boundaries between physics, neuroscience, and philosophy are dissolving. We're being forced to think about mind and matter in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew, and we're only beginning to grasp what this might mean for human existence, for our potential, and for our place in a universe that might be far more conscious than we ever imagined. One of the most startling implications of quantum consciousness is what it suggests about memory. We tend to think of memories as stored files in the brain, like data on a hard drive. You experience something, it gets encoded in neural connections, and later you retrieve it. Fixed, stable, preserved. But anyone who's spent time examining their own memories knows this isn't quite right. Memories shift. They change each time you recall them. Details blur or sharpen. Emotions attached to events can transform completely. You remember things that never happened. You forget things that shaped your entire life. Classical neuroscience explains this through the mechanics of reconsolidation. Each time you recall a memory, you're not just retrieving it, you're rewriting it. The neural connections strengthen or weaken. New associations form. The memory becomes something slightly different than it was before. But quantum consciousness theory suggests something far stranger. Your memories might not be stored at all, at least not in the way we typically imagine. They might exist in quantum superposition, multiple versions of the past coexisting simultaneously until the moment of conscious recollection collapses them into a single, definite memory. Think about what this means. When you remember your childhood bedroom, you're not pulling up a file, you're performing a quantum measurement on a superposition of possible pasts, and the act of remembering determines which version becomes real for you in that moment. The past isn't fixed, it's a quantum cloud of possibilities that consciousness shapes into definite form through the act of recall. This sounds impossible, but it aligns with some puzzling features of memory that classical theories struggle to explain. Why are memories so malleable? Why can two people remember the same event completely differently? Why does the act of remembering change what you remember? If memory is quantum, these aren't bugs. They're features of how quantum systems work. There's even experimental evidence pointing in this direction. Researchers studying memory formation have found that microtubules in neurons undergo quantum state changes during learning. When an animal learns something new, quantum coherence in hippocampal microtubules increases and persists long after the learning event. It's as if the memory is being encoded not just in classical synaptic weights, but in quantum states that can hold multiple versions simultaneously. This has profound implications for identity. If your memories are quantum and changeable, then the story you tell about who you are, the narrative of your life, might be more fluid than you realize. You're not a fixed self with a definite history. You're a consciousness that's continuously collapsing quantum possibilities of past, present, and future into the particular experience of being you right now. But memory is just the beginning. Quantum consciousness theory suggests something even more radical about time itself. In classical physics, time flows in one direction. Past is fixed, future is open, and the present moment is the boundary between them. But quantum mechanics doesn't quite work this way. Quantum processes can violate our normal intuitions about time. Entangled particles can influence each other regardless of when measurements are made. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that the future can influence the past in certain circumstances. If consciousness is quantum, then your awareness might not be as locked into the present moment as it seems. There's controversial but persistent experimental evidence for what researchers call precognition, the ability to sense future events before they occur. At Cornell University, psychologist Darrell Bem ran a series of experiments that generated enormous controversy. He found that participants showed measurable physiological responses to randomly selected future stimuli before those stimuli were chosen or presented. They were reacting to the future, or at least their bodies were. The effect was small but statistically significant across thousands of trials. Mainstream psychology largely rejected these findings, attributing them to statistical artifacts or flawed methodology. But multiple replication attempts have found similar effects, and meta-analyses suggest there's something real happening, even if we don't understand what. Quantum consciousness theory offers a potential explanation. If consciousness operates through quantum processes that aren't bound by classical causality, then awareness might sometimes access information from potential futures that haven't yet been actualized. Not because information is traveling backward in time, but because quantum systems exist in a kind of temporal superposition where past, present, and future are less distinct than our everyday experience suggests. This doesn't mean the future is predetermined. Quantum mechanics is fundamentally probabilistic. The future exists as a space of possibilities, not as a single definite outcome. But consciousness, operating through quantum processes might occasionally sense the probability distribution of potential futures. Which futures are more likely, which carry more quantum weight. Advanced meditators sometimes report experiencing non-linear time during deep practice, moments that feel eternal, sequences that seem to happen simultaneously rather than consecutively, future insights arriving before the circumstances that would prompt them. These descriptions sound mystical, but they might be phenomenological reports of consciousness accessing its own quantum nature, where time works differently than in classical experience. There's also the question of what quantum consciousness implies about death, perhaps the most profound question human beings face. Classical neuroscience suggests that when the brain dies, consciousness ends. The neurons stop firing, the networks dissolve, and the light of awareness simply goes out. You cease to exist. Death is annihilation. But quantum mechanics has a strange relationship with annihilation. One of the fundamental principles of quantum theory is unitarity. Information cannot be destroyed. Quantum information can be transformed, scrambled, spread across vast regions of space, but it cannot disappear from the universe. It must be conserved. If consciousness really is a quantum phenomenon, if awareness involves quantum information, processing in microtubules and neural networks, then the quantum information that constitutes your consciousness cannot simply vanish when your brain stops functioning. It has to go somewhere. It has to persist in some form. This has led some researchers to speculate about what they carefully call post-biological quantum information processing. The idea that the quantum information patterns that give rise to consciousness might continue to exist in the quantum field after the biological structures that organize them have broken down. This isn't quite the same as traditional concepts of an afterlife or soul. It's not about some immaterial essence separating from the body. It's about quantum information, the patterns of entanglement, superposition, and coherence that constitute your conscious experience, persisting in the quantum substrate of reality after your neurons have decayed. What would this feel like, if it feels like anything at all? No one knows. The mathematics suggests the information persists, but whether there's continued subjective experience and what form it might take is completely unknown. Some researchers suggest it might be like dissolving back into a field of undifferentiated consciousness, the individual pattern dispersing, but the awareness continuing in some broader, less localized form. Others are more skeptical, pointing out that even if quantum information is conserved, the specific patterns that create individual consciousness might be so thoroughly scrambled by decoherence that no recognizable awareness could persist. The information would still exist, but not in any form that could be called you. These questions might remain forever beyond the reach of empirical investigation. Science can study consciousness in living brains, but studying what happens to consciousness after death presents obvious methodological challenges. Still, the fact that quantum mechanics forces us to ask these questions seriously, that the mathematics of quantum information theory suggests possibilities beyond simple annihilation, is itself remarkable. There's another aspect of quantum consciousness that touches on deeply human concerns, the question of free will. For centuries, philosophers have debated whether our choices are genuinely free or whether they're determined by prior causes, the firing of neurons, the laws of physics, the chain of causation stretching back to the Big Bang. If the universe is fundamentally deterministic, then free will might be an illusion. Your sense that you're choosing is just the experience of a predetermined neural process unfolding. Quantum mechanics introduced a new element into this debate, genuine randomness. When quantum superpositions collapse, the outcome isn't determined by prior states. It emerges from a realm of pure probability. This has led some researchers to suggest that quantum indeterminacy might be the source of free will. But there's a problem with this simple picture. If your choices are just quantum random, are they really free? Random doesn't mean freely chosen. It just means unpredictable. That's not the kind of freedom we care about when we ask whether we have free will. Quantum consciousness theories suggest a more sophisticated possibility. Perhaps consciousness doesn't just passively experience quantum randomness. Perhaps it actively participates in the collapse of quantum possibilities, selecting which potentials become actual based on something we might call intention or will. In the Penrose-Hameroff model, consciousness emerges from orchestrated objective reduction, quantum collapses that happen in a coordinated way across microtubules throughout the brain. The orchestration part is crucial. It suggests that quantum collapses aren't random, but are influenced by the quantum state of consciousness itself. When you make a decision, whether to continue listening to this or to let your mind wander, that choice might emerge from the quantum computations in your brain's microtubules. Multiple possibilities exist in superposition. Various futures coexist simultaneously. It's then consciousness performs a measurement on itself, collapsing the superposition into a definite choice. This choice isn't predetermined by prior causes, so it's not determined in the classical sense. But it's also not purely random, because it's shaped by the coherent quantum state of your consciousness, your intentions, values, the integrated pattern of your awareness. It's a third option between determinism and randomness, quantum agency. Whether this really constitutes free will in the philosophical sense remains debatable. But it suggests that your choices emerge from processes that transcend classical causation, that your consciousness has genuine causal power not reducible to predetermined neural mechanics or meaningless quantum noise. This matters because it relates to one of the deepest questions about consciousness. Does it actually do anything? In classical neuroscience, there's a puzzle called the hard problem of causation. If consciousness is just what it feels like when neurons fire in certain patterns, then the real causal work is being done by the neurons, not by the consciousness. Your subjective experience would be epiphenomenal, a side effect that doesn't actually cause anything to happen. But if consciousness involves quantum processes, and if those quantum processes genuinely influence neural behavior, then consciousness has causal power. It's not just what it feels like for your brain to work. It's an active participant in determining what your brain does, collapsing quantum possibilities in ways that affect which neurons fire, which behaviors emerge, which choices you make. This restores to consciousness a kind of agency that pure physicalism struggles to account for. You're not just a spectator watching predetermined neural processes unfold. You're an active participant using quantum processes to shape outcomes that aren't fully determined by prior physical states. Of course, all of this remains highly speculative. The experiments continue, the theories evolve. Many neuroscientists remain skeptical that quantum processes play any significant role in consciousness, arguing that classical neural networks can explain everything we need to explain without invoking quantum mechanics. And they might be right. Science advances through careful skepticism, rigorous testing, and the willingness to abandon theories that don't match experimental evidence. Quantum consciousness theories must meet the same standards as any other scientific proposal. They must make testable predictions, survive experimental scrutiny, and prove themselves more explanatory than competing theories. But what's undeniable is that consciousness presents challenges that classical neuroscience has struggled to address: the unity of experience, the richness of subjective awareness, the apparent causal efficacy of consciousness itself, and quantum mechanics, for all its strangeness, offers potential answers to these challenges. More importantly, quantum consciousness research is generating new experiments, new technologies, new ways of investigating the deepest mysteries of mind and reality. Whether or not quantum mechanics proves to be the key to consciousness, the journey of investigation is revealing profound connections between physics, biology, and the nature of awareness. We're living through a unique moment in the history of human knowledge. For the first time, we have the tools to probe quantum processes in living biological systems. We can watch coherence in microtubules. We can measure entanglement signatures in functioning brains. We can test whether quantum effects influence conscious experience. The answers we find might transform not just neuroscience, but our entire understanding of what it means to be conscious beings in a quantum universe. And regardless of where the evidence ultimately leads, The questions themselves, about the nature of mind, the structure of reality, the relationship between awareness and existence, are among the most profound that humans can ask. In the next part of this exploration, we'll look at what all of this might mean for human potential, for the possibilities of consciousness beyond our current understanding, and for our place in a cosmos that might be far more aware than we ever imagined. But for now, rest in the mystery. Your consciousness, whatever its ultimate nature, is experiencing this moment, pondering these questions, participating in the universe's ongoing attempt to understand itself, and that alone is extraordinary. If consciousness really is quantum, then one of the most intriguing questions becomes, can we expand it? Can we develop it? Can we access states of awareness that go beyond our ordinary experience? And if so, what will we find there? Throughout history, humans have pursued altered states of consciousness through meditation, fasting, rhythmic movement, psychoactive plants, sensory deprivation, and countless other methods. Every culture has developed techniques for shifting awareness beyond the default mode of everyday thinking. The methods vary enormously, but the reports that come back show striking similarities. People describe experiences of unity, feeling connected to everything, boundaries dissolving between self and world. They report insights that seem to come from beyond ordinary thinking, understanding that feels more like direct knowing than logical deduction. They encounter what they describe as deeper levels of reality, more fundamental than the surface world of objects and events. For most of modern history, science dismissed these reports as hallucinations or delusions. Interesting from a psychological perspective perhaps, but not revealing anything real about the nature of consciousness or reality. Just the brain doing strange things when its normal functioning is disrupted. But quantum consciousness research is forcing a reconsideration. If awareness operates through quantum processes, and if those processes can access information beyond what's available to classical neural computation, then altered states might not be distortions of normal consciousness. They might be expansions of it, consciousness accessing broader bandwidths of the quantum field. The research on meditation provides some of the clearest evidence for this possibility. When neuroscientists study the brains of long-term meditators, they find structural differences. More grey matter in regions associated with attention and sensory processing, thicker prefrontal cortex, increased connectivity between brain networks that don't normally communicate. But recent studies using quantum-sensitive measurement techniques have found something else. Experienced meditators show increased quantum coherence in their neural microtubules. The longer someone has practiced meditation, the longer their brain can maintain quantum states, and the more synchronized those states become across different brain regions. This isn't just correlation. Training studies have shown that as people develop a meditation practice, their quantum coherence increases over time. It's as if meditation is literally training the brain to sustain and orchestrate quantum processes more effectively. What are meditators doing when they sit in silence, following their breath, watching thoughts arise and dissolve? From a quantum perspective, they might be learning to modulate their own consciousness at the quantum level, increasing coherence, reducing decoherence, allowing quantum superpositions to persist longer before collapsing into definite experiences. And this training seems to have lasting effects on consciousness itself. Experienced meditators report changes in the basic texture of awareness. The sense of being a separate self softens. Awareness becomes more spacious, less confined to the usual boundaries of individual identity. Time feels different, less linear, more like a field of possibilities. And many describe a persistent sense of connection to something larger than themselves. From a classical neuroscience perspective, these are subjective feelings, changes in how the brain represents itself to itself. But from a quantum consciousness perspective, something more might be happening. As quantum coherence increases, consciousness might be accessing information from broader regions of the quantum field, becoming less localized, less confined to the processing happening in one particular brain. The The reports from advanced meditators start to sound less like psychological changes and more like physical discoveries about the nature of consciousness itself. They describe awareness as spacious, open, luminous, words that echo how physicists describe the quantum field. They talk about the dissolution of subject-object boundaries, which is precisely what you'd expect if consciousness were entangling with a larger field. They report a sense that consciousness is more fundamental than the individual mind, which aligns with panpsychist interpretations of quantum mechanics. These parallels don't prove anything, but they're suggestive. The phenomenology of expanded consciousness reported by meditators resembles what we might predict if consciousness really is a quantum phenomenon that can access broader states under the right conditions. Research on psychedelics provides even more dramatic examples. Substances like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, and mescaline reliably produce profound alterations in consciousness. People report experiences of cosmic unity, encounters with seemingly autonomous intelligences, visits to alternate realities, and insights into the fundamental nature of existence that feel more real than ordinary waking consciousness. For decades, these were dismissed as mere hallucinations, the brain malfunctioning under the influence of drugs. But modern neuroscience has found something puzzling. Under psychedelics, the brain doesn't become less organized. In many ways, it becomes more connected. Brain regions that normally operate independently begin communicating. Networks that usually maintain strict boundaries become integrated, and quantum measurements reveal something striking. These substances dramatically increase quantum coherence in neural microtubules. There's a correlation between the subjective intensity of the experience, how cosmic, how profound, how reality-shattering it feels, and the degree of quantum coherence in the brain. This suggests that psychedelics might not be creating hallucinations in the sense of false perceptions. They might be temporarily adjusting the quantum properties of consciousness, allowing awareness to access information and states that are normally filtered out by the brain's ordinary processes. Think of your normal waking consciousness as a radio tuned to a specific frequency. That frequency is optimized for survival, navigating the physical world, recognizing threats and opportunities, maintaining social relationships. It's a narrow but useful bandwidth. Psychedelics might temporarily retune the radio, allowing it to receive signals from other frequencies. Not random noise, but information that's always present in the quantum field, but normally excluded from conscious awareness. The experiences feel profound and real because they're accessing real aspects of quantum reality that ordinary consciousness doesn't register. This interpretation is supported by the fact that insights gained during psychedelic experiences often prove valuable afterward. People solve problems they couldn't solve before. They gain perspective on their lives that leads to lasting positive changes. They understand mathematical or scientific concepts in new ways. This wouldn't make sense if the experiences were purely hallucinatory. But it makes sense if consciousness is temporarily accessing broader information through increased quantum coherence. Johns Hopkins researchers studying psilocybin have found that a single session can produce lasting changes in personality, particularly in the trait called openness, curiosity, creativity, sensitivity to new experiences. These changes persist for months or years after the experience. It's as if the temporary increase in quantum coherence during the session reorganizes consciousness in ways that endure. Even more intriguing are the therapeutic effects. Psychedelics show remarkable promise for treating depression, addiction, PTSD, and anxiety around terminal illness. People often describe these therapeutic effects not as symptom reduction, but as fundamental shifts in perspective, seeing themselves and their lives differently, feeling connected rather than isolated, understanding their suffering in new ways that allow them to release it. From a quantum consciousness perspective, these shifts might not be merely psychological. They might involve actual changes in how consciousness accesses and processes information through quantum mechanisms. Depression and anxiety might involve not just chemical imbalances, but patterns of quantum decoherence, consciousness becoming trapped in narrow, repetitive loops. Psychedelics might work by temporarily restoring quantum coherence, allowing consciousness to access broader possibilities and reorganize itself into healthier patterns. Of course, all of this requires more research. The therapeutic use of psychedelics is still in early stages, and the quantum interpretations are speculative, but the convergence of subjective reports, brain imaging findings, and quantum measurements is striking enough to warrant serious investigation. There's another category of consciousness expansion that deserves attention: near-death experiences. When people come close to dying during cardiac arrest, severe trauma, or surgical complications, some report extraordinary experiences. They describe leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels of light, encountering deceased loved ones or divine beings, experiencing overwhelming love and peace, and often receiving information or insights about existence. Skeptics have long argued these experiences are hallucinations produced by a dying brain. Oxygen deprivation, neurochemical surges, random neural firing. But there are puzzling aspects that this explanation struggles to address. Some people report accurate details about events that occurred while they were clinically dead, conversations among medical staff, actions taken during resuscitation, even events in other rooms. These cases are rare and controversial, but verified instances exist where people accurately describe things they had no normal way of perceiving. From a classical neuroscience perspective, consciousness requires functioning neurons. When the brain stops, consciousness should stop. But if consciousness operates through quantum processes, and if quantum information cannot be destroyed, then perhaps consciousness doesn't require continuous neural activity in the way we've assumed. During the transition between life and death, as neural activity ceases, quantum decoherence might temporarily decrease rather than increase. The brain's normal filtering process is shut down, potentially allowing consciousness to access broader states of the quantum field. The experiences might not be hallucinations, but genuine expansions of awareness occurring as consciousness transitions from its embodied, localized form to something less constrained. This is highly speculative, of course. We can't ethically study near-death experiences under controlled conditions, but quantum consciousness theory offers a framework for taking these reports seriously rather than dismissing them as mere neural artifacts. What ties together meditation, psychedelics, and near-death experiences is that they all seem to involve consciousness accessing states beyond its ordinary boundaries. The methods differ dramatically, but the destination shows remarkable similarities: expanded awareness, dissolution of boundaries, access to information beyond normal perception, a sense of connection to something fundamental. If consciousness really is quantum, then these might not be aberrations or malfunctions. They might be demonstrations of consciousness's true nature, its capacity to transcend the limits of individual embodiment and access broader fields of awareness. This raises profound questions about human potential. If consciousness can be expanded, trained, developed through various practices, then what are the limits? How far can awareness extend? What might become possible as we learn to modulate quantum processes in the brain deliberately? Some researchers are already exploring these possibilities. Transcranial ultrasound, which can stimulate microtubules non-invasively, has shown promise for enhancing cognitive function and mood. People report improved clarity, creativity, and emotional balance after sessions targeting quantum resonances in neural tissue. Other groups are developing neurofeedback techniques that allow people to consciously influence their own quantum coherence. Early experiments suggest that with training, some individuals can learn to increase and sustain quantum states in their brains through intention alone. The effects are subtle but measurable: increased coherence in microtubules, enhanced connectivity between brain regions, subjective reports of expanded awareness. If these techniques can be refined, we might be approaching an era where consciousness development becomes as deliberate as physical training. Just as we've learned to develop muscles, cardiovascular fitness, and coordination, we might learn to develop quantum coherence, expanding our conscious capacities beyond their current limits. The implications are staggering. Could humans develop forms of perception beyond the five senses? Could we learn to access information through quantum channels, developing something like telepathy or remote viewing? Could we expand our empathy and connection to others by strengthening quantum entanglement between minds? These questions sound like science fiction, but they follow logically from quantum consciousness theory. If awareness operates through quantum processes, and if those processes can be enhanced and directed, then capacities we currently consider impossible might simply be underdeveloped potentials waiting to be cultivated. At the same time, we must be cautious. The history of human attempts to expand consciousness includes many cautionary tales. People who pushed too hard, destabilized their minds, lost their grounding in consensus reality. Consciousness is delicate. The brain has evolved filtering mechanisms for good reasons. Not all expanded states are beneficial, and not all information accessible through altered states is trustworthy. The path forward requires wisdom as much as technology. We need to understand not just how to expand consciousness, but why, and toward what ends. Expansion without integration, without grounding, without ethical development could be dangerous. But expansion combined with wisdom, compassion, and care for the consequences could open extraordinary possibilities for human flourishing. What's becoming clear is that consciousness is far more plastic, far more capable of development than our culture has generally assumed. We're not stuck with the awareness we're born with. We're not limited to the default mode of perception. Consciousness is something that can be trained, expanded, deepened, and quantum mechanics might be showing us why. Your mind isn't a fixed entity, but a dynamic quantum process. The boundaries of your awareness aren't rigid walls, but permeable membranes. And the potential for growth, for expanding into broader and richer states of consciousness, might be far greater than we've imagined. As we move toward the final part of this exploration, we'll consider what all of this means for humanity's future, for our understanding of our place in the cosmos, and for the deepest questions about existence, meaning, and the nature of reality itself. But for now, consider this. The consciousness experiencing these ideas right now might be capable of far more than you've realized. The quantum processes in your brain might be the doorway to states of awareness we're only beginning to explore. And the journey of consciousness, your consciousness, might be one of the great adventures still unfolding in the universe. As we near the end of this exploration, we're left with questions that reach beyond neuroscience, beyond physics, into territory that science has traditionally avoided. Questions about meaning, about purpose, about what it means to be a conscious being in a universe that might itself be conscious. If consciousness really is woven into the quantum fabric of reality, if awareness is fundamental rather than emergent, then the universe we inhabit is radically different from the cold, mechanical cosmos that classical physics described. We're not accidents of chemistry in a dead universe. We're expressions of something fundamental. Consciousness, knowing itself through countless forms, experiencing reality from infinite perspectives. This isn't just philosophical speculation. It follows logically from quantum consciousness theories combined with what physics tells us about the quantum field. If consciousness operates through quantum processes, and if quantum processes connect all things through entanglement and non-locality, then individual minds aren't truly separate. They're localized expressions of a broader field of consciousness that permeates reality. Physicist John Wheeler, who coined the term black hole and made fundamental contributions to quantum mechanics, spent his later years developing what he called a participatory universe. He proposed that reality isn't something that exists independently of observation, waiting to be discovered. Instead, the universe brings itself into existence through the act of observation, through consciousness measuring and collapsing quantum possibilities into definite outcomes. Wheeler's famous thought experiment, the delayed choice experiment, demonstrated that decisions made by observers in the present can determine what happened in the past. Light from a distant quasar passes around a galaxy on its journey to Earth. Does the photon take one path or both? According to quantum mechanics, it depends on how we choose to measure it billions of years later. Our observation now determines which path the photon took then. This isn't time travel, it's something stranger. The universe is past existing in quantum superposition until consciousness collapses it into definite history. Wheeler proposed that we live in a self-excited circuit. The universe gives rise to consciousness, and consciousness gives rise to the universe, in an eternal loop of mutual creation. If this sounds mystical, it's worth remembering that it comes from rigorous physics, not religious doctrine. Wheeler wasn't a mystic. He was one of the most respected physicists of his generation. But the mathematics of quantum mechanics, taken seriously, seems to point toward a participatory cosmos, where consciousness and physical reality are co-creative partners. This perspective transforms how we might think about humanity's role in the universe. We're not passive observers of a predetermined reality. We're active participants in reality's ongoing creation. Every moment of conscious awareness contributes to the universe actualizing itself from quantum potential. The choices you make, the attention you pay, the quality of your consciousness, all of this might matter in ways far beyond your immediate personal experience. If consciousness collapses quantum possibilities into definite outcomes, then the evolution of consciousness might be driving the evolution of reality itself. This could explain something that has puzzled cosmologists for decades. Why does the universe appear fine-tuned for consciousness to exist? The physical constants, the laws of nature, the initial conditions of the Big Bang, all seem exquisitely calibrated to allow for the emergence of complex structures, life, and eventually awareness. Some scientists invoke the anthropic principle. We observe a universe compatible with consciousness because we couldn't exist to observe any other kind. Others propose a multiverse where all possible universes exist, and we naturally find ourselves in one of the rare ones that permits consciousness. But quantum consciousness theories suggest a third possibility. The universe and consciousness co-evolved. The quantum field has the potential for both physical reality and awareness. As the universe evolved, consciousness emerged and began participating in reality's creation through quantum observation. The universe became increasingly fine-tuned for consciousness because consciousness was helping to shape the universe. This creates a feedback loop. More consciousness means more quantum observation, which means more actualization of potentials favorable to consciousness, which allows even more consciousness to emerge. The universe might be engaged in a process of self-awakening, gradually becoming more conscious through beings like us. If this is true, then the appearance of conscious life isn't a cosmic accident. It's the universe's inevitable trajectory. Reality becoming aware of itself through an infinite variety of conscious perspectives. You're not separate from this process. You're one of the ways the universe experiences and understands itself. This perspective offers a kind of meaning that doesn't depend on religious belief or philosophical assumption. It emerges from taking quantum mechanics and consciousness research seriously. Your existence matters because consciousness matters to the structure of reality. The quality of your awareness contributes to the universe's ongoing creation. But this raises ethical questions. If consciousness shapes reality through quantum processes, then we bear responsibility not just for our actions, but for the quality of our awareness itself. The thoughts we cultivate, the attention we give, the intentions we hold, all might influence the fabric of reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. This doesn't mean you can manifest reality through positive thinking, or that consciousness creates the physical world arbitrarily. The quantum field constrains what's possible. Physical laws remain. But within those constraints, consciousness might have genuine creative power, selecting which possibilities actualize from the space of quantum potential. This could explain something that researchers have found puzzling: the apparent effects of collective consciousness on physical systems. The Global Consciousness Project has monitored random number generators around the world for over 20 years. These devices should produce completely random outputs based on quantum processes. Yet during major global events, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, worldwide celebrations, the randomness decreases. The outputs become slightly more ordered, as if some coherent influence were affecting quantum processes worldwide. Mainstream science remains skeptical, and the interpretation is controversial. But if consciousness can influence quantum systems, and if the focused attention of millions or billions of people during global events creates coherent consciousness fields, then such effects might be exactly what we'd predict. The implications extend to questions about extraterrestrial consciousness. If the universe is engaged in a process of self-awakening, then Earth is unlikely to be the only place where consciousness has emerged. Wherever physical conditions allow for complex information processing, consciousness might arise, or more accurately, the universal field of consciousness might localize into specific forms. This changes how we might think about contact with other conscious beings. We're not isolated intelligences trying to communicate across vast gulfs of empty space. We're localized nodes in a cosmic network of consciousness, potentially already connected at the quantum level through the field we all share. Some researchers have speculated that certain altered states of consciousness, particularly those induced by DMT and related compounds, might allow access to communication with non-human intelligences. The experiences are remarkably consistent across cultures and individuals: encounters with seemingly autonomous entities, exchange of information, visits to alternate realities. Whether these entities are genuinely other consciousnesses or aspects of one's own expanded awareness remains unclear. But quantum consciousness theory suggests a third possibility. They might be both. If individual minds are localized expressions of a broader consciousness field, then expanding your awareness through altered states might allow access to other localized expressions, other minds, other forms of consciousness, existing in the same quantum field. This is deeply speculative, of course. We're at the very edge of what current science can address. But the questions themselves show how quantum consciousness theories are pushing us toward a more expansive understanding of mind, reality, and our place in existence. Perhaps the most profound implication is what quantum consciousness suggests about the deep nature of reality itself. Physics has been on a long journey from matter to information. Newton saw the universe as solid objects moving through space according to mechanical laws. Einstein revealed that matter is energy, and space and time are unified and relative. Quantum mechanics showed that particles are really probability waves, and observation determines outcomes. Now, quantum information theory is suggesting that information might be more fundamental than either matter or energy. The properties of particles, mass, charge, spin, might be information encoded in quantum fields. Physical reality might be, at its deepest level, information actualizing itself through quantum processes. And if consciousness is also information processing at the quantum level, then mind and matter aren't separate domains. They're both expressions of quantum information, different aspects of a deeper reality that transcends the distinction between physical and mental. This view, sometimes called digital physics or informational realism, resonates with ancient philosophical traditions that saw consciousness and cosmos as unified. But now we have mathematical frameworks and experimental methods to explore these ideas with scientific rigor. We might be approaching a new synthesis, not a return to mysticism, but a transcendence of the old divisions between science and spirituality, between objective and subjective, between matter and mind. Quantum consciousness research is revealing that these divisions were never as absolute as we thought. They're useful distinctions at the classical level, but they break down in the quantum realm where everything connects. This brings us back to you, here, now, experiencing these ideas. Whether or not every detail of quantum consciousness theories proves correct, something remarkable is undeniable. You are aware. You're experiencing. You're a localized region of the universe that knows it exists, that can wonder about its own nature, that can ask questions about consciousness and cosmos. That awareness, whatever its mechanism, whatever its ultimate nature, is extraordinary. In a universe of unconscious matter and energy, consciousness has emerged or revealed itself, creating inner worlds as vast and complex as the outer cosmos. And if quantum consciousness theories are even partially correct, then your awareness isn't trapped inside your skull, isolated and alone. It's connected to something larger, entangled with the quantum field that underlies all reality, participating in the universe's ongoing process of self-understanding. This doesn't diminish the value of your individual experience, it enhances it. every moment of awareness, every conscious choice, every instance of attention and intention contributes to the cosmic process. Your consciousness matters not just to you, but to the fabric of reality itself. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider that the boundary between waking and dreaming, between consciousness and unconsciousness, might be softer than we think. Sleep and dream states involve different patterns of quantum coherence in the brain. You're not losing consciousness, you're shifting it, accessing different frequencies of the quantum field, and in deep sleep, in the absence of localized individual awareness, perhaps consciousness returns temporarily to its source, the broader field from which all individual minds emerge and to which they return, not as annihilation, but as reunion, a nightly reminder that you're not separate from the whole, just a temporarily individuated expression of something vast. The quantum consciousness revolution is still unfolding. New experiments are running in laboratories worldwide. New theories are being developed and tested. Our understanding will deepen, and many current ideas will likely be revised or abandoned. That's how science works, through continuous refinement, not through revelation of final truths. But whatever the ultimate explanation of consciousness proves to be, we're living through a remarkable moment. The boundaries between disciplines are dissolving. Physics, neuroscience, philosophy, and even contemplative traditions are converging in a shared investigation of consciousness and reality. We're asking questions that were once considered beyond the reach of science. We're developing tools to probe the quantum nature of living systems. We're taking seriously the possibility that mind and cosmos are fundamentally unified, and we're discovering that the universe might be far stranger, far more wonderful, far more conscious than we ever imagined. Your consciousness, experiencing this moment, wondering about these possibilities, is part of this great adventure. You're not just learning about quantum consciousness, you are quantum consciousness, temporarily localized in the form of a human mind, participating in the universe's ongoing attempt to understand itself. So rest well, knowing that even in sleep, consciousness continues its quantum dance. The microtubules in your neurons will keep vibrating at frequencies that shouldn't be possible. Quantum coherence will persist in the warm chaos of your brain, and awareness, in some form, will remain, shifting, exploring, perhaps accessing regions of the quantum field that waking consciousness cannot reach, and when you wake, you'll return to the localized, individual experience of being you, but perhaps with a deeper sense that this individual experience is connected to something larger, that consciousness isn't confined to your skull, but extends through quantum channels into the fabric of reality itself. The mystery of consciousness remains, but we're learning to ask better questions, to explore with better tools, to think about mind and reality in ways that honor both scientific rigor and the profound strangeness of existence. And that journey of discovery, your journey, humanity's journey, the universe's journey of self-understanding, continues, moment by moment, quantum collapse by quantum collapse, consciousness bringing reality into being, and reality giving rise to consciousness in an eternal dance of mutual creation. Sleep well, dream deeply, and know that your consciousness, in all its mystery and wonder, is part of the most extraordinary story in the cosmos, the universe waking up to itself.